Welcome, Dédé.
Oh, thank you.
I was so excited. Now, I am one who grew up with an easy bake oven. So my first question is going to be, when you were 5,
yes.
Tell me, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I had no idea, but it's funny that you zeroed in on 5. I did not have an easy bake oven, but I do have a 5-year-old experience involving a real stove, which I guess I could
I want to hear that.
Tell you. So I thought that I was going to be standing up here and talking, and I'm actually excited because your questions will take me who knows where. And I was thinking about things from my home life and things from school and how they've been formative for me. And what happened at home happened at 5. My father had learned how to cook when he was in Paris after World War II from his French housekeeper, and she had taught him how to make omelets. And when I was 5 years old, he decided, I'm going to teach Dédé how to cook, and I'm going to recreate this scene and teach her how to make omelets. And so we've been talking about experiential learning, and certainly I am someone that benefits from that. And although, of course, at the time you don't think about the fact that I'm doing experiential learning, you're just having this amazing experience. So my father recreated the scene, gathered together the eggs and all the ingredients. The difference, of course, is that I needed to stand on a chair to reach the counter. And he proceeded to show me how to crack the eggs so that no shell got into them. And he showed me how his housekeeper had told him to whisk the eggs with a fork because you want to incorporate a little air but not too much. And she'd like to add a little bit of water because this made the eggs fluffy. And he had brought home an omelet pan from France and showed me this is an omelet pan and this is why. And he's showing me the slant of the sides and the diameter of the base and why it is the way it is. And, how much butter to put in the pan and how to tilt it so that it's coated. And, all this learning is going on. I mean, meanwhile, obviously, I'm just thinking I'm having a great time. So he showed me how to make the 3 omelets I remember. We made a ham omelet. And he showed me how after you put the ham inside, after you finish the omelet, we're going to put little bits of ham on the top. And that way, the person we're serving it to knows they're getting a ham omelet. And then his 2 favorites were a cheese omelet and a crouton omelet, which is not, you don't see it really in the States. And the idea behind the crouton omelet is that you saute little squares of bread, you make the croutons, and they're crunchy. And then you're making the omelet, and you're trying to keep the eggs soft and velvety and moist, but you're trying to put these dry, crunchy croutons in the middle, and it's all supposed to come together at the perfect time so that the eggs are cooked, but the croutons aren't smushy. And, we're doing all of this. So the story goes, and I do not remember this myself, but it has been relayed to me many times. Shortly after this, I was having sleepover. So I was 5 years old, was in kindergarten, and my girlfriend Annette was sleeping over. And my father observed me that evening before I went to bed. I came into the kitchen and I took a piece of Gruyere cheese out of the fridge and I cut a small piece and I wrapped it up and put it on the counter and I put the big piece back in the fridge and I was going back to join my girlfriend. And he said to me, Dédé, wait, why did you do that? Why did you leave the cheese on the counter? And I said to him, well, I'm making a cheese omelet for Annette in the morning and I want the cheese to be at room temperature so it melts evenly. So, he says at that point he should have known my future. But again, this at 5, I had no idea. We've been talking a lot about after school stuff. I was dancing at the Joffrey Ballet, this is Greenwich Village. I was 2 blocks away. I'm taking pottery lessons. I'm horseback riding. But food was a big thing from the beginning.
So it's interesting. He created Paris in your kitchen. You
Absolutely.
had this sensory experience. So I happened to be reading your blogs, and there was a blog about how literally I bathed in wine in France.
Yeah.
So you have to tell us about that.
Well, it's an amazing story. So when I was 13, my father was friends with the president of Air France, and he had a daughter who was 16, and I was 13, and they thought it would be a brilliant idea for me to go spend the summer with them in the south of France. Now, there's a huge difference between a 16-year-old European girl and a 13-year-old American, and I went and I was miserable. I could not connect with this girl at all. But we went horseback riding. We had that in common. And her uncle had a chateau up the hill from their house, and we would trudge up there in the really hot, hot sun and go swimming in the pool. And so there was this pool that overlooked this valley. This was about 45 minutes outside of Lyon, so amazing countryside. And one side of the long edge of the pool had grapes growing near it. And the grapes, as they became ripe, would fall into the pool. And it fragranced the pool. And so you would dive into the water and there would just be that essence of the aroma of, you know, and yes, I mean, I wrote a story. I'm so happy you read those stories. It was an amazing experience. And just, you know, going back for a moment about, you know, my dad. So my dad's business was import-export. He speaks 8 languages, traveled all over the world. And so here I was in the early 60s, mid-60s, early 70s. He would come home from trips with all kinds of things. Like he would come home from Indonesia with 8 different sembols. You know, like no one knew what sembol was in the United States in 1964. You know, all these different condiments, and we'd be tasting things. And he was cooking. Sunday night was always when we did pasta, and he would do authentic Italian food. I mean, people didn't do authentic Italian food at that time. So he would go wherever he needed to go in New York to get the pancetta, or he would go to wherever he needed to go into New York to get, you know, the right pecorino. And so I didn't know that my palate was being educated, but it was.
So it sounds like your family environment was pretty pivotal in terms of giving you that exposure to food. What was school like?
It's, you know, what happened in school, again, so picture Greenwich Village at that time, time and space, very small, progressive private school. We had 30 kids in a grade, 15 kids to a class. So it was a rarefied existence, it was. And with Bakepedia, you know, for me, my daily existence is food and writing, food and writing. I mean, this is what I'm doing all day long. And my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Ms. Stats, Maggie Stats, was hugely influential for me. Now, let me set the stage. She was a formidable woman. She went on to be Saul Bellows' lover. He writes, you know, had written about her. She went on to work at the New Yorker. But at this point in time, she was our 7th and 8th grade English teacher. And I loved the picture of the classroom with, you know, all those desks. She had beanbag chairs and she had Moroccan rugs, and I remember her, so she was probably in her 30s with her like twee haircut, and she would have, you know, this like, you know, wool jumper, mini dresses on. She was very mod and hip. And she would take us on field trips to Revolution Books, and all of us would buy, you know, Mao's Little Red Book, and she would have us read Art Bookwald and The Mouse That Roared and all these really interesting things. But the thing about Ms. Stats was I'm friends with a bunch of my classmates. And I emailed them all about a month ago, and I said, I'm going to be doing this talk, and I know I'm going to bring up Ms. Stats, and I wanted to know if you guys had any memories. And what was fascinating is that all of us were so different then as well as now, yet all of us had a consistent experience of her, which I thought was really interesting. And what that was that she was so authentic. I mean, warts and all. I mean, she would do inappropriate things like, can you imagine in this day and age telling a student that his handwriting looked psychotic? But she did. And she was sitting at her desk. She would sit at her desk with her legs tucked underneath, smoking. I mean, can you imagine? So 1974. And as one of my classmates said to me, he said, you know, she was about getting it in, meaning reading, and getting it out, meaning writing. Punctuation be damned. This was about thought. This was about, you know, you're an individual. What do you think of this? Now express what you think. Let's write, you know. And the common experience that we all had was that I said, you know, she might have been the first adult who treated me like an adult, albeit a short 14-year-old adult. But one of my classmates said she was the first one who treated me like a sentient being. I mean, there was something about her where she didn't just set the bar high and expect us to reach it. She set the bar high and just knew we could. And so we did. You know, there was this sense of confidence that she instilled in us and this sense of individuality. And do you mind if I tie it to the future?
Oh,
do you mind if I
please.
keep going?
Absolutely.
So the last time I had her as a teacher was 1975. And exactly 20 years later, 1995, I signed my first book deal. And so I'm looking at this contract, and it says, okay, you now are responsible for writing a cookbook. You know, we gave you the advance, you better write it. And the deadline's in 18 months. 18-month deadline. Never experienced anything like that before. Obviously, at that point, being my first book, never written a book before, really stewed about this for a day or two. How am I going to do this? And then it came back to me. Ms. Statz's outlines. She had us create outlines for everything we did, you know, and so here we had a beginning, a middle, and an end. We had structure, we had flow. And even though I had one of Apple's first laptop computers, which I think was like that thick and really heavy, I did it the way we did it in 1975. I pulled out a piece of paper, and I made an outline for this cookbook, and I was ready to turn it in 2 months early. I mean, it worked. I mean, here were these tools that were laid down way back when. And so then when the book was published, I tracked her down. And she, at that point in time, was the editor-in-chief at Travel Holiday. I only recently found out, literally like a few weeks ago, that none of us knew why she had left the New Yorker. There were like all these like rumors, did you get fired? Like, you know, why did she leave the New Yorker? And it was because Saul didn't like the New Yorker, so she left the New Yorker. But anyway, so she was editor-in-chief at Travel Holiday magazine, and I tracked her down, and I said, you know, I just published my first book, and here's the experience, and I pulled out these old tools, and it was so gratifying to be able to have that connection and to be able to relay that to her. So when I emailed all my friends about a month ago, there were about 8 of us on this collective email, 8 or 9 of us, and all these stories are going back and forth about Ms. Stats. And one of our classmates, Valerie, said, you're not going to believe this, but I'm having lunch with her next Tuesday because I'm going to be teaching an undergraduate class, and I want to somehow conjure that mixture that she had of command and accessibility, and so whatever, we're having lunch. And then the emails are going back and forth, and then Valerie said to all of us, do you mind if I show her all these emails? Because I think she might get a kick. She goes, it seems to me like these are the kinds of things that you say at someone's eulogy, but then obviously you don't get that. Exactly. But the funny thing was that several of the boys had been saying how she was kind of this sensual being to them. And so, you know, Valerie was worried, you know, like, is it okay if I tell her that you thought of her this way? And as one of them said, you know what, I bet you she's still the same way today. And it turns out she got married 5 times, and I don't know, she's a very passionate woman. So she shared with her all of that, and she actually wrote back to all of us, and actually we're hoping we're all going to get together. But I think we all felt that, you know, the experience with my father, the experience with her, the common denominator to me is, you know, I was really little. I was 5, and then I was, you know, just into my teenage years with Ms. Stats. But the relationship with these adults was a very adult relationship. Was the teaching was being imparted in a way that was ageless. It was really about, well, this is how you make an omelet. I'm not going to dumb it down. Or, you know, this is how you write an outline or create an outline. And this is how to get your brain to think critically. It wasn't dumbed down. None of it was dumbed down. It was very much imparted in this way to us where we were, you know, where I was treated as someone who could handle this information. Could absorb this information. And I think that, you know, with the cooking, the tactile stuff, and someone, I forget which speaker was speaking before, about saying putting things into a practical realm. I sucked at math. I mean, I was always really good at English. I could always write. I could always express myself verbally or in the written word. I was horrible at math. Horrible. I mean, really bad. Like, barely hanging on. And now, every day, I mean, for years now, you know, that first book, now it's 14 books later, in every one of those books, I mean, we're talking about a lot of math, you know, measuring volumes, you know, weights, comparisons, doubling things, having something to apply it to. all of a sudden math works for me. I still can't. We were actually, my boyfriend, we were stuck in traffic coming. We left time to get here because of the parade, and we're stopped still, and he's like, it says we're 16 miles away, so if we're going 60 miles an hour, I was like, no, I can't do that. I said, give me, if it's in like volume or cups or, dry measurement, then I can handle it. But I think that, knowing how one's brain works, whether the student has figured that out themselves and they're able to communicate and they're able to say, well, I need this to understand that, or whether it's a teacher who can see, okay, well, they're having problems absorbing this particular concept in the way it's being delivered right now, but perhaps there's a different way to deliver that message to allow that brain to use it.
And what I find interesting is I'm sure there was no guidance counselor that said, okay, you've got this love of food and this love of writing. Let's put it together to create your brand. Right. What was that moment where you saw that you could blend the two together? What was the influence?
I ended up going to, I went to Hampshire College, and I was there doing, I entered as a journalism student, then I sort of veered off. Then I was doing pre-med for a while, for about a year and a half, and then got totally tapped out, and I took a break for about a half a year to try and figure out what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, what do I really like? I was like, I like food. And that's when I sort of put it together. And I think what was interesting about that is that none of the adults in my life helped me do that. My parents didn't, and none of the teachers did. I think it wasn't that more of an avocation was I was dissuaded from going that way, but it was never presented to me as an option. My mother went to Smith. She was all excited I was going to be in the Valley. I think it was just assumed that there was going to be some sort of academic
component.
Right. And so that still remains sort of frustrating to me, that I was, around all these really smart people who knew who I was and what I was into, but no one sort of presented to me externally.
Well, I found,
you could do this.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I believe you have some family members who are pursuing a food path.
My daughter and my
your
son.
Daughter and your son, and you have one who is undecided. So
right.
let's talk a little bit about how did that happen? Did you have the omelet when they were 5? Or?
It's so funny. So my daughter, my 28-year-old daughter has a wholesale bakery in New York City, and then I have twin 23-year-old boys, and one of them is at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, and he's pursuing food, really traditionally. And then his twin works in restaurants, just to make a living. So, my daughter was doing this for quite a while, and everybody says to me, well, of course she is. And I said, what do you mean, of course? It's not like every Wednesday they came home from school, and I said, today we're going to learn how to roast a chicken. It wasn't like that. But, in retrospect, I realized it was exactly what I had experienced. It was just that they were in a home where there was real food around and real cooking being done, and there was interaction with ingredients and with equipment, and so it was more through osmosis, I think.
Well, I think you read an interesting blog about how healthy lunches at schools need a makeover as well. And I'm curious as to, with the obesity problem in the United States, how did you create the environment, and what did you see in schools, and what would you like to pave for the high school cafeteria ladies who are part of our children's future?
It's so funny, my boyfriend's always, he's like, I live with a world-class baker, and I don't get enough baked goods. Moderation is key, and also I think, like I said, real food. So people will email me and they'll say, I want to make this cake with aspartame, or, and I am so interested in real food with real nutrients. And if you're working with butter and sugar and white flour, there are, amazing things that you can create with these ingredients, which are obviously, we would never profess them to be healthy. But if it's a birthday cake, if it is the occasional thing, it's like, have a slice of real cheesecake as opposed to eating, 100-calorie, fake
artificial
ice pop, every day.
So,
you know, but it's hard because the cost analysis, I mean, the whole thing with farm to table and getting schools involved with, regional agriculture and trying to buy direct from farms and stuff like that. I mean, that may be the solution because it'll give you the real food, but also hopefully keep the cost down.
So we have 39 seconds, a little more than that, to create the perfect recipe to educators for how to create entrepreneurs, scientists, creative folks. What would be going into that recipe?
I would say, while no one showed me what to do, I'd say that my home life and my school life showed me there really wasn't anything I couldn't do. So I think there was always a sense in my education, whether it was home or at school, that there are possibilities, that the world is open to you, that you need to use your brain to think about who am I, what gets my creative juices flowing, what interests me, and then go. You know, that there were no walls. No walls.
And you created Bakepedia.
I did.
So tell us about that pivot point influence.
So Bakepedia, so I specialize in baking, and 2 years ago, the word Bakepedia entered my body, literally. Like, when it entered my head, I felt something hit my head. I mean, I'm not kidding. And I went like this, and I don't think I've heard that word. And I called up one of the registries, and the URL was available, and I was thinking, this is crazy, and I registered it, still not knowing what it was. But what it's hoping to be, what I'm hoping to do with the whole concept is Bakepedia will be the most comprehensive online resource for things related to baking and desserts. So it's live. We launched in August, and I think I was saying to you before, it's like this live beast now that I have to feed every day with content. But, those outlines, actually, I don't have much time for outlines anymore. I won't tell Ms. Stats that. But lots of writing, lots of creative thought.
Well, Dédé, thanks for feeding our mind, and we're going to be having some of your delectable treats this afternoon and giving us a little bit of your story. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dédé.